Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al-Ibrahim headquarters. These are our top stories. The US and Russia appoint high-level peace agreement teams to end the war in Ukraine during the first round of talks in Saudi Arabia. Zelenzkyy postpones his trip to Riyadh, saying talks shouldn't have taken place behind our backs and demands Europe gets a say in the negotiations. And more power, more speed and scary smart. Elon Musk launches his company's latest chatbot, Grok 3. To our top story, and US and Russian officials have finished their first round of talks about ending the war in Ukraine. They met for over 4 hours in Saudi Arabia, and Russia's chief foreign policy advisor, Yuri Sharkov, said their meeting went well. The two sides agreed to appoint negotiators to end the war in Ukraine and briefly discuss the conditions needed for a Putin-Trump summit. To talk more about how significant today's meeting has been, we can now go to Ivan Starodubtsev, a political scientist in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, Ivan. This meeting has been described as historic. Can you explain exactly why this is?
First of all, thank you so much for having me in your program. The meaning of historic is just that this is a first face-to-face meeting between the Russian and the US delegations since the beginning of the special military operation performed by Russia. Up to now, there was no such a meeting and there was no such intention to reach a peace deal.
Yes, absolutely. And as you say, we haven't had a peace deal as of yet. But after the meeting, both sides have seemed to react well, with Sergei Lavrov saying they didn't just listen, they heard each other's sides. How significant is this warming of relations between the US and Russia?
Actually, before the special military operation of Russia, there was a lot of attempts by the Russian side to reach the minds and hearts of the Western partners. There was a lot of proposals about European architecture for security, but unfortunately, we were not heard. So when our Minister of Foreign Affairs just saying that this time we were heard, it is very much significant. Not to just talk, but also to be heard and understood.
Volodmyr Zelenzkyy has actually postponed his Saudi visit this week, saying talks shouldn't be happening behind our backs. Ivan, Marco Rubio has pushed back against Europe's concerns about being iced out of these talks. But really, where does this leave Zelensky now? What are his options?
Actually, the most support by weapons and by finance up to now was coming from the US side. So now Zelensky is in a very difficult situation because he lost, if you may call so, his main sponsor. So he's just trying somehow to balance this loss by inviting different players from another parts of the world, from Europe and whatsoever. But I do think that it will be hard to substitute the United States.
Yes, indeed. And Russia's economy has really suffered. We know that from sanctions. During these discussions, the US has suggested these should be lifted. Is this another sign they're giving Russia more concessions, essentially?
Actually, yes, you are fully right. Russia suffered a lot from the economic sanctions, but it is a half of the truth. Another half of the truth is that Russia, first time for the last 3 decades, started to rely more on its own production and all own economical potential. So this was a very much important change of mind in Russia. So I would suggest for us to go on relying on ourselves. So it should be a very big and important outcome of this situation and all of this war.
Ivan Starodubtsev, a political scientist in Eastern Europe and Russia, thank you so much for your insights this evening. Earlier today, Al-Arabia's chief international anchor Hadley Gamble spoke exclusively to a Russian official, the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, Kirill Dmitriev, who said there were hard and difficult roads ahead. Take a listen.
Great to see you. So tell me about what's been discussed today. How close are we getting to a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I think everybody was very appreciative of Saudi Arabia's role because being here, having the two sides engage in a very positive, productive conversation, good dialogue was very important. And Saudi side and the Crown Prince and his team created a very positive environment.
Couldn't have been done without Saudi.
Couldn't have been done in a more positive manner and couldn't have been done without Saudi. And then the discussion was very positive. I think we are still far away from solutions. We just started dialogue, but the dialogue is based on people really engaging and understanding each other, understanding concerns, something that was amazingly lacking during Biden administration. So I think dialogue has started. We need to manage expectations because still lots of issues, lots of things that need to be resolved.
Do you believe President Zelenskyy will at some point join these conversations?
Again, I'm more focused on economic cooperation, focus on, joint investment, economic activity we can do. So any political comments are best left to Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Ushakov.
In your mind, how close are we to reopening the taps, if you will? Because Germany obviously is hurting without Russian gas. Do you anticipate that we're going to see Russian gas back in Germany anytime soon?
Well, I think, again, too early to say. I think all we just said, let's think about different economic cooperation possibilities. I think we shouldn't, raise expectations too far. I think Biden administration really did everything they could to stop any communication, any conversation. So we just restarted.
Yeah.
But it will be very hard and difficult road ahead. We still have many differences. We still have many different viewpoints on many things. But at least we're engaged and we are discussing.
Did you get a sense that Marco Rubio wants to get a deal done?
Well, I think definitely President Trump directed his team to engage in a very constructive conversation, in a very positive conversation, and try to finish Ukrainian conflict as soon as possible. And I think it's clear from the approach, but the approach understands also differences in views, difference in perspectives, but definitely there is, major drive by, President Trump and his team to finish Ukrainian conflict as soon as possible.
In your mind, was there any difference made to the talks at the table without Europe here? Should they have been at the table?
Well, again, political questions. Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Ushakov, they're better answering this. But I think it's very important that Russia and US talk directly. Russia and US didn't talk directly for a long, long time. I think great conversation between President Putin, President Trump last week was really remarkable in restarting this engagement process. So Russia and US should be able to speak directly. That's very important.
To talk more about Saudi Arabia's role in the peace talks, I'm joined by political analyst and Saudi-US relations expert, Ahmed Al-Ibrahim. Thank you so much for joining me, Ahmed. How significant is it that the meeting was held in Saudi Arabia? All eyes on Riyadh becoming the new center for peace negotiations, it seems.
Oh, definitely. First of all, thank you for having me, and my greetings to you and to your viewers. Definitely, it's a very significant meeting that is happening in Saudi Arabia. It positioned Riyadh to be the political hub of Saudi Arabia and probably the whole world. Saudi Arabia has hosted many events from before, and to basically take this event and moderate this event, that shows the capabilities of what Saudi Arabia in the global vision and in the geopolitical vision, and it positions the vision of MBS on how Saudi Arabia would basically construct itself politically to be the peace world, the city or capital of the world, to host these kind of big political conflict and to be resolved in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
The stakes are high as the war in Ukraine enters the third year, but the meeting seemed to have gone pretty well. What would have Saudi's role been today whilst hosting both the US and Russia?
Saudi has played a crucial role. Let's state the fact that Saudi Arabia has a neutral position among everybody involved over here, whether it's from Iran, from Russia, from the US. So the trust level that these stakeholders that want to come to Saudi Arabia, they felt that they are comfortable to come to Saudi Arabia because of the position Saudi Arabia in the past 3 years. So what Saudi and Riyadh was the best capital and the best deal for everybody, let alone the relationship between the current administration, Donald Trump, and President Putin with our leader, MBS. It's been always good and fine, and it's always built on trust. So definitely it played a great deal in basically brokering this peace deal between Russia and the United States, bring them on to table, being indiscreet without actually having any NATO pressure from the Western world. This meeting, I think today, it wouldn't have been happening in the Western world because of the constant pressure is going to be, happening from everybody else in Europe and NATO. Saudi was the best place and the best time for everybody to gather and take this peace on and onward.
As you say, Saudi is a neutral position, really, but you did mention NATO there, and a lot of Europe feel that they have been iced out of these talks. Do you think that's fair to say?
Well, it is in a way. They will be involved at a certain stage, but the bulk of the problem lies between the United States and Russia first. Of course, President Zelenskyy is going to come on. He's going to come on a stage later on because Ukraine does matter, and he is the president of Ukraine. So these big issues that need to be conducted, it has to be done with the United States. President Donald Trump, he's coming to the table. And he is not talking to Russia as there is a problem between America and Russia. It's actually the whole ecosystem between Europe or the Western world, let's put it this way, and Russia, and how everybody within these kind of people who is contributing to all this escalation that it happens against Russia needs to be basically revised by the United States, which is the greatest ally to them and is the greatest country that is supporting the Ukraine and the biggest donor for this proxy war that's happened with Russia. So I think what's going to happen is the European Union, everybody who has an issue with Russia, it's going to come at a later on stage, in my opinion, and it's going to be handled by the United States. And that's why I think the outcomes of today's meeting, that the Putin-Trump meeting is going to be delayed a little bit.
I actually did want to ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about Putin and Trump meeting and what the possibility of that is. And do you think that will definitely happen in Saudi Arabia when it does happen? As you said, no sort of timeline on that yet.
I think, no sort of time as of yet, and definitely big possibility it will happen in Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia has the right of everything for this meeting to happen, not because I'm Saudi, but it's because of all the, all the leadership, the relationship with the president, how Saudi Arabia has for the past 3 years has been in a trusted position with Russia, in a trusted position with Ukraine, with everybody in EU, with everybody in the United States, with the previous administration, with Trump being in power. So I think the whole dynamics makes sense. Let alone Saudi Arabia it's a big country. It contributes to the economy in the world in a big way. Since the leadership of MBS, We cannot ignore that Saudi Arabia has been involved globally in so many peace initiatives by releasing the American prisoners from Russia, by playing ball with China in order to normalize our conflict with Iran, by stabilizing Iraq, by working with Syria, by trying to help Lebanon stand on their feet, and the challenges in Egypt and what they can do in Sudan, and also trying to down the conflict in Yemen. So you can see where Saudi Arabia is heading. It's need a lot of work. It's need a lot of vision. It took a lot of calculation step by the king and by the crown prince in order to do these kind of moves. And I think within the past couple of years, Saudi has put themselves as a leader and a global player in the politics and the geopolitical politics space. And I think if this goes well, probably Saudi Arabia will be the peace broker between, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and finally we're going to have peace.
Ahmed, Saudi is also a country Donald Trump is so determined to work closely with. Does he see Saudi as a key part to helping end the conflicts in the Middle East and Europe? Or do you think he sees it as a good strategic step business-wise?
I think he sees them both. We all understand that President Donald Trump, he comes from business background, but he also likes the concept of flipping the table. So what he do is he comes and he flips the table in politics. He asks for the maximum, and this is dangerous, of course, but sometimes it works. It needs to be managed. But he always asks for the maximum, and he can settle for less. We've seen that in the previous 4 years of his presidency. We're seeing it right now in some of the files, because he's putting the extreme, hoping to get things at a certain level in order to basically do peace. We've seen that with Israel. We've seen that in Iran. We've seen that in a couple other countries, with NATO, with Germany. So at the end of the day, hello? Hello? Hello?
Sorry, please do continue. Sorry,
so basically what happens is, we've seen that with Germany, we've seen President Donald Trump, how he deals with file. But definitely, from a political point of view, he relies a lot in Saudi Arabia, especially with the biggest conflict forever is taken, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that I'm sure President Donald Trump in the previous administration and this administration is going to rely a lot on Saudi Arabia. Definitely, we are tied by the hip when it comes to economy between Saudi Arabia and America. We have a lot of interest together. We see a lot of things together in the eye of positive, but also we have conflicts, and we've seen that when President Donald Trump actually asked for displacement of 2 million people from Gaza, and our Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he sent a statement against that within 20 minutes. So we understand what the challenges of these decisions that was probably published by the White House, and we stand for it as a country, as a nation, as people from the Gulf and the Pan-Arabia and the MENA region. And also there's a lot of things that we agree with this administration. So we are still in the probably 3 months period now, or 2 months and a half with Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of positive outcomes more than negative, but I think we are a very strategic partner for this administration.
Yes, indeed. Ahmed Al-Ibrahim, political analyst and Saudi-US relations expert. Great speaking to you. I hope to have you back on the show soon. Thank you so much.
Likewise, thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. At least 18 people have been injured in a plane crash in Canada. Footage from Toronto Pearson International Airport shows the aircraft upside down and covered in snow on the tarmac after it landed. Officials have said all passengers and crew on board the Delta Airlines flight from Minneapolis were evacuated. Investigators are looking into what caused the crash. According to a report, President Trump's government is pressuring Romanian authorities to remove travel restrictions on controversial influencer Andrew Tate and his brother. The Financial Times believes the Tate's case was brought up by US officials in a phone call with the Romanian government last week. The brothers have been accused of human trafficking and rape in Romania. Both do deny any wrongdoing. Jordan's King Abdullah has undergone minor surgery to treat a hernia today. A statement released by the Royal Palace said the procedure was successful and the 63-year-old king will resume his daily schedule tomorrow after being discharged from the King Hussein Medical Center in Amman. A powerful winter storm that's hit large parts of central and eastern United States has killed at least 14 people. Local and federal authorities have declared a state of emergency after floods, gale-force winds and freezing temperatures. Kentucky's governor is urging people to stay off roads across the state after 1,000 people were rescued from the floods. Israel will receive the bodies of 4 hostages captured in Gaza this Thursday. An Israeli security official confirmed they are also working on bringing back 6 living captives this weekend. Both handovers are part of the first phase of the ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Hamas last month. At least 31 people have died after a bus crashed in Bolivia in the mountainous area of Yacalo. Police believe the driver lost control of the vehicle, which fell more than 2,000 feet. 10 adults and 4 children were taken to hospital, with a number of those in intensive care. A British couple detained in Iran have been charged with espionage. They have been named as Craig and Lindsay Foreman. Iranian state media said the couple were in custody in the city of Kerman on security-related charges. More on our top story and the Ukraine peace talks held by US and Russia in Saudi Arabia. Whilst the meetings were taking place, Ukraine's President Zelenzkyy traveled to Turkey's capital city, Ankara, meeting with President Erdogan. In a press conference in the last few hours, he criticized the meeting in Riyadh and said talks shouldn't take place behind our backs. Let's take a look at just what he had to say.
I'm convinced that it is a matter of principle for Ukraine, for our region, and for Europe that any negotiations on ending the war do not take place behind the backs of the key actors affected by the consequences of Russian aggression. Ukraine, Europe in a broad sense, and this includes the European Union, Turkey, and the UK, should be involved in conversations and the development of the necessary security guarantees.
Our correspondent in Kyiv, Stuart Smith, has been following this story closely. He joins me now. Stuart, this just isn't a surprising reaction from Zelenskyy, is it? He's constantly criticized any talks about Ukraine without him, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has, and he will continue to do so. His view on this is that there should be, because the Russian war affects not just Ukraine, but the region around it, then any country in the region affected by this action should also have a say. And for the first time, we heard explicitly that Volodymyr Zelenskyy believes Turkey should be involved in these negotiations, which can be added to the list of other European countries, the European Union, and of course, the United States as well. He said he also, in that press conference, still wants the United States to provide troops on the ground in Ukraine, even though Washington has ruled that out, as well as any potential European peacekeeping force. Both of those options ruled out by Russia, I should say, after the discussions in Riyadh. It says that no deployment of any European or North American country can go ahead, regardless of whether it's under the banner of NATO, the EU, or some other peacekeeping force. Zelenskyy also suggested that he believes the new US administration's policy and and negotiating tactics have effectively put it in line with Russia's foreign policy desires, and he's particularly frustrated by that. If Ukraine is not accepted into NATO, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is asking the European Union and the United States and other partners to please outline what exactly then Ukraine could take as security guarantees, because at that point this still isn't clear.
Stuart, he also said he discussed global processes in great detail that could lead to the end of this war with President Erdogan. What more was talked about during that meeting?
Well, President Zelensky's main train of thought is if there were more weapons provided to Ukraine and the right amount of funding when Ukraine said it needed it, there wouldn't need to be any discussions at all with Russia. Ukraine would have the ability to push back Russian forces by itself and effectively force Russia into negotiations. With that not happening, Ukraine has made a few suggestions about where this could go from its point of view, as well as potential hundreds of thousands of peacekeepers deploying to the country. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said that this so-called minerals for security deal is still on the table, despite in Munich that deal not being signed with the United States. The Ukraine says it's still open to that, but wants to see what it would be getting for its money, because effectively what it's being asked to do, according to this draft deal, is give up 50% of the profits of its mineral resources, from critical minerals to metals to oil and gas, to the United States. But Zelenskyy says in return for what? So that part still has not been worked out. Now, an optimist in Ukraine may say, well, that's great. Ukraine has something here that it can offer Washington to try to keep it invested and interested in Ukraine's security. But there was a concerning comment for Ukraine that came earlier that suggested Ukraine isn't the only country that Washington is looking at with regard to potentially treating this more like a business deal than a peace negotiation, because US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that that there is the possibility that this could be a brilliant business opportunity for the United States if it manages to secure peace with Russia. He called it a historic opportunity, which could send jitters here in Kyiv, because that means that the United States is not looking just at ending the war, but also what it could gain from it.
Stuart, Zelenskyy also postponed a much-anticipated trip to Saudi Arabia. He was due to go there tomorrow. Do we know why this has happened so last minute?
That's right. He said it was a long-planned state visit, and it was a coincidence more than anything else that meant that the United States and Russia chose to visit Riyadh on this day, right ahead of that trip by President Zelenskyy. And it was suggested one sign as to whether things went well or not for Ukraine could be whether the United States officials hang around in Saudi Arabia to then later talk to President Zelenskyy. But we heard earlier in the day he said he's postponed that trip to later in March. The reason and explanation he gave at the time was this. He said, what matters to me is how our partners perceive us. We are absolutely honest and transparent. I don't want any misunderstanding. That's why I will not be going to Saudi Arabia. That in and of itself, quite a hard statement to understand, but unofficial sources have now spoken to global press and suggested the point he was trying to make is that he doesn't want to give any legitimacy to these bilateral talks that took place in Riyadh. It is, as you said, Ukraine considers this, as other countries going behind its back regarding peace negotiations it feels it should be involved in, and it is certainly annoyed, if not concerned, that the United States and Russia are doing bilateral deals without Ukraine's involvement on how this war should end.
Yes, indeed. But Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, will actually visit Kyiv on Thursday, and Zelenskyy wants to take him on a joint trip to the front line after the events of last week. This will be a significant step, do you think, Stuart?
It'll be the first, or rather the most senior military official to visit from the new US administration since President Trump came to power. And indeed, President Zelenskyy was very keen that Keith Kellogg, a former general himself, could be invited to see the front line and talk to Ukrainian troops there. Now, Keith Kellogg's involvement in this has been, in the last week, somewhat uncertain because he wasn't, for example, at that meeting in Riyadh with those other high-profile US figures, and so it's questionable now to what extent he has any leverage over the outcome of peace negotiations. He is technically President Trump's envoy for Ukraine and Russia, but he certainly hasn't had the opportunity to speak to Russia in the same way, for example, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio did. And so he is coming to Ukraine, and he has said that no one is going to force Ukraine into a peace that it does not want. But the question will be, with all the negotiations taking place so far before Ukraine has had a chance to be involved in the talks, that it may be pretty much an ultimatum by the time it gets to the president in Kyiv, a kind of take it or leave it deal. That is what President Zelenskyy is trying to avoid. It's interesting that Keith Kellogg did not come last night, many in Kyiv are saying, because we had here one of the most extreme drone attacks since the beginning of the war taking place. It almost broke the record for November last year, 177 drone attacks. And interestingly, right as that meeting concluded in Riyadh, a ballistic missile alert went off across much of Ukraine, forcing millions into their bomb shelters as that was launched this way. So Russia appearing confident as these talks go on, and certainly people here in Ukraine fearing what the outcome could be if Zelenskyy isn't involved in these talks.
Stuart Smith in Kyiv, thank you so much for speaking to me this evening. Let's take a look at the top business news. There has been a surprise rise in wages in the UK as unemployment unexpectedly stayed the same. It marks the third month in a row of wage growth after a year of slowing. According to the Office for National Statistics, average weekly earnings rose 6% in the 3 months to December, beating expectations. Now, Australia's central bank has cut rates for the first time since the 2020 pandemic. However, policymakers warn it's too early to declare victory over inflation and do remain cautious about the prospects of a further easing. Earlier today, the RBA cut the cash rate by a quarter point to 4.1%. Let's turn to sports news now. Heavy snowfall and adverse weather conditions in North America have delayed Lionel Messi's Inter Miami Champions Cup debut. According to the America's soccer body, the match between Inter Miami and Sporting Kansas City has been postponed until tomorrow. Today's match would have been Inter Miami's debut in the continental competition. A reminder of our top stories. The US and Russia appoint high-level peace agreement teams to end the war in Ukraine during the first round of talks in Saudi Arabia. Zelenskyy postpones his trip to Riyadh, saying talks shouldn't take place behind our backs and demands Europe gets a say in the negotiations. And more power, more speed, and scary smart. Elon Musk launches his company's latest chatbot, Grok 3. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. The dressing room, well, that's coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you.